It is hard to hear what happened particularly Friday in the news, and not just have your heart be troubled. If it weren't, I'd check your pulse. I mean, think of it this week alone. Over 129 were killed in Paris, hundreds injured by multiple attacks. Also this week in Beirut, 43 were killed and hundreds injured in bombings. In Baghdad, 18 were killed at a funeral and dozens injured. We could go through and rehearse the whole year acts of terrorism that hang in the world, that are heavy in our hearts. Even in religious news, even those here at home. You remember the past couple of years, the church and pastor in Florida threatening to burn the Quran, the holy book of Islam. Or people at a Sikh temple in the United States being gunned down as they pray. The synagogue in the United States being sprayed with swastikas. And we could go on and on. And we must stop and we must mourn and we must honor. But what has troubled me is more the reaction. Seems we hear outcries for some of these acts of violence and yet hear nothing on others. The Facebook and the news are full of the horror of Paris. We stand with France, and we should. But I didn't see anyone put the colors of the flag of Lebanon on their profile picture. Not one. We barely noticed the 147 killed at a university, friends. A girls' school in Kenya. Do you remember that in April? Same terror, different country. Do we stop and mourn the dead in places whose names roll off our tongues as if it's acceptable because, violence always happens there? But we have to stop because it's not supposed to happen in Paris, the city of lights. These places that the majority of us could not even guess the colors of the victims' flags. Seems we hear outcries for some of these acts of violence and nothing on others. But I tell you what has offended me the most, and is in the end does more damage, is the reaction when folks rush to judgments about an entire world religion rather than focus on the small, narrow-minded group behind such attacks. Blaming all Muslims for what happened in Paris, or Baghdad, or Beirut, or Kenya is no different than blaming all Christians for the terrorism here at home perpetuated by the Ku Klux Klan. And yes, don't even think they're not still around. They are. It's no different, friends. The Daesh, a better name for this latest terrorist group we sometimes call ISIS or ISIL, does not represent Islam any more than the KKK represents this church. We must distinguish. We must. It seems we have let our prejudice, our ignorance get the best of us, particularly in the Abrahamic faith, in these traditions that come from Abraham. Isn't it ironic that Abraham is considered the father? And we mustn't forget Sara and Hagar, the mothers. Okay, let's just always put that out there too. But isn't it interesting that the father of three world religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and yet over the millennia, we have become this terribly dysfunctional, troubled family of feuding cousins. We can do better. We must do better. And all three world faiths compel us and teach us to do better. I want you to hear my outcry as a Christian, and frankly, my embarrassment, my outrage, and my sorrow for this misguided prejudice, particularly toward our Muslim brothers and sisters. And if you don't know one, get to know the two that walked in our church today during hospitality hour, the kindest, most gentlest men you'll ever know. Don't even speak about something broad like that without knowing what you speak of, without knowing the people that are so very faithful. And do we listen when regular old Joe Blow Muslims denounce such attacks just like we would denounce them? Attacks that are perpetrated on them too. Are we as Christians listening? Do we stand with them? The most meaningful exchange I had yesterday was my friend Ahmed Ibrahim, who's one of the leaders of the Bridgeport Islamic Community Center. And I wrote him and I said, we are with you. We are listening. And we're so sorry for what people are saying about your faith. And he wrote back, he says, my hope will not be diminished as long as I know Christians like those at United Congregational Church. Those who condemn entire world's faith do not speak for me, do not speak for my Christian faith, and I'm not going to stand silently by and let people presume that they do. So where do we go for guidance and strength? In our Christian tradition, we go to the book. And Micah 4 is a text that Martin Luther King, as he worked for justice and against violence, he used these words often. Did you hear them? Nobody can read them like Lisa Brown McNevich, but I shall repeat them again. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, and they shall not learn war anymore. But did you see, that's not the last step we take. The last is they shall sit under their own vines, under their own fig trees, in their own land, and no one will make them afraid. For all the people walk, each in the name of their God, and we will walk in the name of ours. Sounds like pluralism to me. So what does that text say to us today? God is trying to get us to get along, to get us to stop fighting, to use our energy to grow and be productive, to learn from one another, to put our money and our tools into being productive rather than destructive. And then wherever we sit, to grow, to live, to worship, to where we don't have to be afraid. The Sikhs that were gunned down as they pray should be able to walk into their Sikh temple unafraid. Because everybody follows their own path, just as we walk in ours. This is why I am a Christian pluralist. Now hear me out. You're always some type of pluralist or some type of exclusivist. Pluralism and exclusivism is how we look at other faiths. But you always do it from your own spiritual tradition. A Christian exclusivist thinks they're the only way and they denounce everybody else. A pluralist holds fast to their faith, but respects that other people hold fast to theirs too. And if you think this is some new idea, I just read you the thing from Micah, but it runs all the way through our good Bible. Carved in stone on either side of our portico out front is a scripture from another prophet named Isaiah. My house shall be called a house of prayer. Does it say just for Christians? No. A house of prayer for all peoples. Meaning we don't have a corner on the truth market. We're not the only way. We're the way we know. Because I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky. I didn't even met a Jew till I went to college. I think there's 5 in the whole state. But do you know, when I go home today, right next to my little hometown, where the Baptists thought they ruled the world, and us Methodists were excluded, there are 2 beautiful mosques. And my mother and I, last time she was able to drive, I was driving her, we were going by, and she was, oh, look what the Muslims are building. Isn't that a beautiful church? I'm like, it's not a church, Mama. Oh. But what her point was, is we have yet another beautiful place of worship. Indeed. When we say this is a house of prayer for all peoples, we acknowledge there are many ways to understand the holy. There are many paths to God. We just walk in ours. But we welcome, we respect that others walk in theirs. And I told my UB kids very clearly on Wednesday when we gathered, I'm inviting you to our interfaith service today, to our college kind of celebration we're having. 1, so we'll double our numbers. That's always good. Really, it's not funny. Okay, people, it's not funny. I said, but I invite you not to change you, not to scare you, but to welcome you, to respect you. And did we hear the story right out of the Gospel of Luke about our own Jesus, who after encountering the Roman centurion, who prayed to the gods and goddesses of the Roman pantheon, did not denounce him, but praised and lifted up the centurion's faith. He even said, I haven't seen faith like this in all of Israel. The United States is one of the most religiously diverse nations in the world today, right up there with India. And yet it seems the various groups in the United States, we have to have a spiritual superiority complex. My religion's better than yours. It's ridiculous. We need all the religion, whatever form it takes, that the world can get. We ought to worry about the people running around on nothing than worrying about the people that have a great thing to draw on. We must stop thinking we have a corner on the God market and thinking that if someone else has a different path, then it must be inferior to mine. How prejudiced? I don't know. Where I come from, we call it snooty. How arrogant. But more often, how impractical. If we don't get this respect thing down, we will all kill each other. Either literally with bombs, or what I read yesterday on Facebook with words. And rather than standing on holy ground, we'll be stomping on the sacred. We must learn to live with religious diversity. We're going to live next to a Jew. We might know a Unificationist, or a Hindu, or a Jain, or a Sikh, and if you don't know what those religions are, then we have a lot of work to do. Our children will go to school with Muslims. We might actually fall in love with a Buddhist. They're very calm people. You'll like that. None of this need to threaten our faith. We can be secure and confident in who we are. And that's how then you're willing to learn where someone else sits. Being respectful of another world religion does not mean giving up our beliefs. It means when we are willing to learn about another religion, our faith is deepened. But we must be willing to approach another person and say, tell me about your experience of the holy. Where did you see God this week? So see, the first rule of interfaith dialogue is to listen and learn. And the second is then we have to share our experience of the holy. And see, I think this is what gets Christians. They have no idea what they really think, and so they get really insecure when they run up against somebody else who might know what they do think. See, we have to go deep enough in our own that we have something to share. What does Jesus mean to you? That's the question Christians ought to talk about. Not how this one and this one and this one doesn't meet our standards. We do not have to give up our faith in an interfaith process. We merely acknowledge that another spiritual tradition means just as much to them as ours means to us. I put it in your bulletin today. A great Buddhist teaching. There are many wells to the one water. Whatever well you drink from it deeply. There are many wells to the one water. Whatever you drink from it deeply. There are a lot of paths up the mountain. Get on one. But know that there are others walking next to you on theirs. And it also, though, doesn't mean we partake of a spiritual buffet. A little of this, a little of that. It means whatever you believe it, use it, work it, live it, dig deep into it. Because then that's how you'll value that someone else has drunk deeply from theirs. And you're like, well, that's all fine and good, Reverend Sara, but how do you know we really don't give up religion when we respect others? Because I know Etta Kornman, an Orthodox Jew that lives in Fort Worth, Texas. She follows all 633 laws of the Hebrew Scriptures. There is absolutely no way I could do that. Cotton and not mixed with polyester, forget it. Not eat a pork chop, forget it. And bacon? Now you're on my sacred ground, right? But what I learned from Etta was discipline. And she and I became fast friends and did dialogues together when I was in seminary. And she says, you know more about Hebrew Scriptures than I do. I was like, no, we're both learning. Or my friend Jeffar, a Muslim from Iran that I met at Texas Christian University. He was my lab partner my first year. Now remember, I didn't know any Jews, but I hadn't even heard of Islam. I was a stupid white Christian from Kentucky. And here comes this nice fella who had been deposed when the Shah was deposed. He was a medical doctor in Iran, and he had to start all over in honors bio, and I was his lab partner. And I said, hey, let's go get pizza. Oh, only hamburger. I was like, what? No pepperoni? I mean, it's all about food. And then I noticed while we were dissecting the fetal pig, Jeffar would never touch it. I was like, hey, I'm doing all the work here. And he goes, oh no, I'm a good Muslim. I don't touch the pig. I was like, okay, but can you tell me what this is? Because I have no idea. But what I learned from Jeffar is 5 times a day, he would go to his little Volkswagen Bug. Now, y'all, this was 30 years ago. And he would pray 5 times a day. I figured I could eat hamburger pizza for anybody who's that faithful. And then my student Chris Stagg, out in Boulder, Colorado, where there are more Buddhists than Presbyterians. Sorry, Jack. He gave up everything to go to the Buddhist monastery in Nova Scotia. He meditates every day, and he's on his second level of vows in the Buddhist tradition. I took him there to the Shambhala Center. I couldn't sit on the cushion. I couldn't sit still long enough. But Chris found himself there. Now, knowing these people and their stories changed me. Knowing my students as the interfaith chaplain at UB now changes me. Now, do they make me become a Jew or a Muslim or a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Unificationist? No, I am who I am. But it challenged me to grow in my Christian faith. If I had half of Etta Koreman's Jewish discipline, I'd be a better Christian. If I had half of Jeff R.'s Muslim's prayer life, if I prayed 5 times a day, watch out. I'd be a better Christian. If I had half of the inner calm that Chris, my Buddhist, worked daily to achieve, I know I'd be a healthier Christian. If I had half of my Hindu students' Anjali's devotion on her phone, she's 20 years old, and on her phone is a picture of the God she worships. If I had half of that devotion, I'd be a better Christian. If I had half of my Unificationist students' loving kindness, I've never met a group of more loving, gentle, kind people, I'd be a better Christian. You see, knowing these faithful people from across the religious gamut helped me dig my well deeper. Now, my path to the holy is Christian. I try to love God with everything I have, and I try to follow our Jesus. But today, in this world, walking my little path is not enough. We must learn to walk with others. That's why this church is involved in the Tent of Abraham, and we do our big Thanksgiving service. And if you don't come, you'll miss the best church you've ever had. This is why we do the interfaith work at our university down the street. This is why we have a college interfaith Sunday. And this is why today, even as we mourn, we're going to practice walking together with all people of faith. And we're going to do it with respect. May that be so, friends. And may it be soon.